are sounds you never forget. The crack of a branch in darkness. The howl that doesn't quite belong to any animal you know. The moment when silence becomes so complete that your own heartbeat sounds like thunder. And then there are the sounds that change everything. The scream that starts human and ends as something else entirely. Tonight we're going back to the British countryside. Not the postcard version with rolling green hills and quaint stone cottages. The other one. The one that remembers when wolves still hunted these lands. When the forests were deeper, older, and full of things that had no names. This is a story about a man who went hunting for foxes and found something that hunted him back. It begins on a full moon night about 5 years ago. Two friends, out in the fields with rifles and spotlights, doing what's called pest control in the UK. Foxes had been raiding chicken coops across several farms, tearing through wire, killing birds not for food, but seemingly for sport. Farmers were losing money. Someone had to do something. The narrator of this story, we'll call him the hunter, had been doing this work for years. He knew the land, knew the rhythms of nocturnal predators, knew how foxes moved, how they thought, where they hid. His friend Charlie was with him that night, equally experienced, equally comfortable in the dark. The moon was extraordinarily bright. So bright you could read by it, the hunter said. The kind of light that makes shadows sharp and distances deceptive. They set up on a hill overlooking a field, rifles ready, red filtered spotlights mounted and checked. In the UK, hunters use red light because it doesn't spook animals as much as white light does. Foxes especially can be skittish. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Until they heard it. A sound that, in the hunter's words, made every hair on his body stand up. It started as a human scream. Not a shout. Not a yell. A scream of pure terror or agony. The kind that comes from the throat when the mind has lost all control. But then it changed. The scream morphed, seamlessly, impossibly, into a wolf's howl. One sound bleeding into the other like a voice caught mid-transformation. The hunter had been around the British countryside his entire life. He'd heard foxes bark, deer bellow, badgers screech, owls shriek. He knew every sound the night could make. This was not one of them. Charlie and the hunter looked at each other. Neither spoke for a moment. Then the hunter, trying to break the tension with humor, the way the British do, made a joke. Maybe it's a werewolf. They both laughed. Nervous laughter. The kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Then they heard something crashing through the woods below them. Not the delicate steps of a deer. Not the scurrying of a badger. Something big, moving fast, snapping branches like they were matchsticks. Cold shivers ran down the hunter's spine instantly. Without a word, both men started packing up their gear. Pride didn't matter. Bravado didn't matter. Whatever was down there in the dark, they wanted no part of it. As they walked back to the truck, the hunter couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the tree line. Eyes in the shadows. A presence that tracked their every step. They made it back. They drove home. They told themselves it was nothing. But neither of them slept well that night. About a month later, they went back out. You might think that's madness. Why return to a place where something inexplicable had frightened you so badly? But the foxes hadn't stopped. The farmers were still losing chickens. Old Tom Fitzgerald had lost 12 birds in a single week. Mrs. Peaton up at High Farm found her prize rooster torn to pieces, not eaten, just destroyed. Someone had to do the job. This time the hunter packed extra ammunition. Told himself it was just being prudent. But deep down, he knew he was preparing for something more than foxes. Charlie noticed. Made a joke about expecting an army of foxes. But there was an edge to his voice. Neither of them had forgotten that scream. They set up near some sheep pens. Pregnant ewes huddled together under the moonlight, bleating nervously, pressing against each other. Sheep have good instincts. They know when something is wrong. They'd been out for about an hour when they heard it again. The same howling. Closer this time. The sound rolled across the fields like a wave, echoing off the hills. Charlie grabbed the hunter's arm, fingers digging in hard. "That's not natural," he whispered. The hunter swung his red spotlight across the field and found eyes, standing approximately 5.5 feet off the ground. The hunter knew his wildlife. He'd hunted everything from rabbits to red deer. No fox, no badger, no deer stood that tall. And this thing had something dead in its mouth. The spotlight passed over it at first, his brain not quite processing what he was seeing. When he realized what he'd just illuminated, he quickly swung the light back. The eyes were gone. But he heard it take off down the hill, running straight through a barbed wire fence. It didn't slow down. Didn't hesitate. I just crashed through the fence as if it were cobwebs. The sound was tremendous. Wire snapping. Posts groaning. Then a massive commotion down through the woods. The howl came again, closer, and the hunter said to Charlie, "We better pack up." His voice was steadier than he felt. He stood guard while Charlie packed, eyes scanning the darkness, every shadow suspect, every sound amplified. He handed Charlie his shotgun after loading a 1-ounce slug into it. In the UK, firearms are heavily restricted. But for pest control, shotguns are permitted. And that night, the hunter was very glad to have his. Charlie kept watch while the hunter packed his gear. Then they started walking back to the vehicle. That's when they heard it. Something approaching through the woods next to them. Heavy footsteps. Deliberate. Purposeful. This wasn't curiosity. This was stalking. They didn't run. You never run from a predator. But they walked fast. Very fast. The whole way back, the hunter could feel eyes on him. Could hear branches snapping in the woods alongside them. Could sense something pacing them just out of sight. When they finally reached the truck and climbed inside, they locked the doors and didn't speak until they were miles away. Since that night, the hunter made a rule for himself. Every time he went shooting, he carried several slugs or heavy buckshot, the kind designed to stop large, dangerous animals. Because if he ever came across that thing again, he wanted to be prepared to stop it dead. But that wasn't the end. About 2 years later, the hunter had another encounter that made the first seem almost tame. This time it was with a different friend, a man named James. James was interesting. His grandmother had been Native American. His family had moved to the UK when he was young, but he'd grown up hearing stories about creatures that walked like men but weren't men. Stories that most of his British schoolmates dismissed as superstition. After what the hunter had seen, he was more open to believing. They were out late one night protecting pheasants from foxes on one of the local estates. The hunter had just shot a fox and taken the tail as a trophy, a tradition that shows respect for the animal and proves to the farmer the job's been done. They moved to another section of the field, not expecting much. The hunter was using a standard white torch this time. After 2 years without incident, he'd gotten a bit complacent. Stopped jumping at every shadow. Stopped carrying as many heavy rounds. He caught a set of eyes at the top of the field through his night vision. He decided to put the spotlight on it. The eyes were at ground level near the top of a bank, just behind a 6-foot hedge. Then the eyes went from ground level to approximately 3 feet in the air, like the thing had stood up. The hunter could see it in the torch beam. Pale white-gray in color. Massive. James, whose native heritage had taught him things most people never learn, turned around and said something that probably saved their lives. "Unload your gun. Lay it on the floor. We need to kneel down and show it we don't mean it any harm." The hunter was young and cocky at the time, ready to shoot at anything that threatened the pheasants. But there was something in James's voice. Generations of wisdom. Ancient knowledge passed down through bloodlines. So the hunter listened. All they could hear was a clicking, guttural growl mixed with a high-pitched scream that occasionally pierced the night air. It was like nothing the hunter had ever heard before. Like nothing that should exist in the British countryside. They did what James said. Unloaded the gun. Showed it they weren't a threat. Knelt. And prayed. Within seconds of showing submission, there was a final high-pitched scream. And they heard something running away. When the hunter looked up, the eyes were gone. He reloaded that gun faster than he'd ever done in his life, and they took off out of there like their lives depended on it. Oh, because maybe they did. They didn't go back to that place for 6 weeks. When the hunter finally returned, alone this time, because James refused to set foot near that place again, he brought a tape measure. He was determined to prove to himself that he hadn't imagined it. The day was overcast, threatening rain. Typical British weather. The place looked different in daylight, less threatening, more ordinary. But when he found the spot where they'd knelt that night, he could still see the impressions in the soft earth. He measured from the ground where he'd seen those eyes. Factoring in the bank and the hedge, whatever he'd seen had been standing approximately 8.5 to 9 feet in height. He took photos, made notes, sketched a rough diagram. He needed evidence, even if it was just for himself. On the way back to his truck, he found something else. Tracks. Partially washed away by rain, but still visible. They looked almost human, but longer, with what appeared to be claw marks at the tips of the toes. The hunter tried to repress the story. Tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light. Maybe an escaped animal from a private collection. But deep down, he knew better. Whatever he'd seen moved with too much intelligence. Too much purpose. Then things escalated. A friend of his, Tom, decided to ignore warnings about not going down to that area on a full moon. Tom went missing for a while. When the hunter finally got hold of him, Tom was a changed man. He'd come across the same creature and barely escaped with his life. He spent days researching, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Around the same time, local farmers started reporting more livestock losses. Sheep were being found torn to pieces. This wasn't foxwork. The hunter knew what fox kills looked like. This was something entirely different. The damage was too extensive, too violent. By this time, the hunter had gotten married. His wife was 6 months pregnant. The stress of knowing what was out there was getting to both of them. She begged him to move, to leave the area. But how could he explain that running wouldn't help? That this thing had his scent? That it was intelligent enough to track them? The hunter recently acquired his rifle license. Not easy to get in the UK, but with the mounting livestock losses, he had proper justification. He borrowed a friend's .30-06 rifle with 180-grain bullets. He decided it was time to be proactive. He built a hide, a proper elevated hunting stand, out of old telegraph poles and railway sleepers. Something solid. Something that would take a while to destroy if something that size came for him. It stood about 20 feet in the air. For 3 nights before the full moon, he sat in that hide, saw a couple of foxes, took care of those. But he knew it wasn't foxes doing the real damage. On the night of the full moon, with a slight overcast letting just enough light through, he was using a thermal scope when he caught a large heat source moving through the tall grass and small trees. It was heading for the pregnant ewes about 200 yards out. He watched the heat source move around, moving with the wind so it wouldn't be noticed by the sheep. That's when he realized how intelligent this thing was. It understood wind direction, understood hunting tactics. It wasn't just some wild animal. It was calculating, planning. As it got closer, he could see how large it was through the thermal scope. This wasn't any natural creature in the UK. When it finally made its move on the sheep, he had a clear shot at about 180 yards. He waited until it grabbed one of the sheep. Then he fired. The bullet impacted, knocked the creature to the ground. He instantly reloaded and put another one into it as it tried to stand. That's when it looked straight at him. Even at that distance, even through the scope, he could see its eyes. Intelligent, malevolent, promising violence. Blood was running from its chest, but the bullets seemed to have almost no effect on it. Like shooting into dense muscle and bone that just absorbed the impact. He managed to get a 3rd round off, hitting it in the neck, which finally caused it to run away. Thank God. But it didn't go far. The hunter barricaded the door to his hide, shut all the windows and blinds. He was 20 feet in the air in a structure built like a fortress. But he wasn't taking any chances. And that's when it came back. The creature must have circled around behind him. It impacted the structure from behind with such force that the whole thing rocked. Those foot-thick railway sleepers, those massive telegraph poles, groaned under the assault. Whatever this thing was, it was strong enough to shake a structure that would hold up against a charging rhino. Luckily, it never got inside. But he could hear it trying. Claws scraping against wood, a clicking growl. He changed the magazine so he had a full load and waited it out until sunlight. Longest night of his life. When dawn finally broke and he felt safe enough to leave, he found his ATV had been flipped over and destroyed. Deep claw marks in the metal, plastic torn apart. He had to make it back to his truck on foot, constantly looking over his shoulder. After that night, the hunter knew conventional ammunition wasn't going to work. That's when he started researching. Really researching. He and Tom spent hours in the local library, combing through old newspapers, parish records, anything that might give them a clue. They found stories going back centuries. Tales of black dogs in East Anglia. The Barguest in Yorkshire. Accounts of strange deaths during full moons that were blamed on wolves, long after wolves had been extinct in Britain. One account from 1743 particularly caught their attention. A parish priest in a village not 20 miles from where the hunter lived had written about a demon in the shape of a wolf that had terrorized the area for 3 months. The killings had stopped only after a local blacksmith melted down silver church ornaments to make musket balls. The creature's body was never found, but the attacks ceased. Tom was invaluable during this time. After his own encounter, he'd reached out to Native American communities in the States, remembering what James had told the hunter about his grandmother's stories. "There are things in the old forests," Tom told him one evening over tea. "Things that wear the skins of men by day and beasts by night. The old stories all say the same thing. Silver is the only thing that can truly kill them." The consensus seemed to be that if they were dealing with a werewolf, a dogman, or something similar, then silver might be their only option. Getting silver bullets made in the UK isn't easy. The hunter found a specialty ammunition maker who usually did historical reproductions for museums. He told him he was part of a historical society recreating the 1743 incident. The man thought it was eccentric but legal. The bullets cost a fortune. But what price do you put on your family's safety? While they waited for the bullets, the situation got worse. 3 more farms reported losses. Not just sheep this time, but cattle too. A prize Highland bull worth thousands of pounds was found torn apart. The local police were baffled. The silver bullets arrived on a Tuesday. Beautiful things, if death can be beautiful. Hand-cast, perfectly weighted, designed to mushroom on impact for maximum damage. The hunters spent 2 days at the range getting a feel for how they shot. They were slightly different from regular ammunition, but at the distances he'd be shooting, it wouldn't matter much. Yeah, he'd been studying the pattern of attacks, mapping them out. There was definitely a territory this thing was working within. About 10 square miles of mixed woodland and farmland. The center point seemed to be an old-growth forest, the kind of ancient British woodland that's been undisturbed for centuries. The next full moon was 3 days away. The hunter decided not to wait. He borrowed trail cameras, set them up along what he believed were the creature's regular routes. He wanted early warning this time. He set up in a different location, choosing a spot where the woods met open farmland. This wasn't a makeshift hide. He'd invested in a proper elevated platform with reinforced steel brackets and supports. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. Usually you'd hear owls, foxes, the rustle of small mammals. But the woods were dead silent. Like every living thing was holding its breath. The second night, one of the trail cameras triggered. When he checked the image on his phone, his blood ran cold. The photo showed something bipedal. Massive, covered in what looked like gray-brown fur. It was walking upright. And in its hand, yes, hand, not paw, it carried what appeared to be a dead sheep. But the worst part was its face. The camera had caught it in profile. While the image was grainy, he could make out an elongated snout, pointed ears, and, God help him, an expression that looked almost thoughtful, intelligent. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was thinking, planning. He showed the image to Tom the next morning. They both agreed they couldn't share this with anyone else. People would either think it was fake or worse, it would attract attention. Monster hunters, scientists, media. Their quiet corner of England would become a circus. He made backups of the image, then deleted it from the camera. The third night, he repositioned himself based on the camera data. The temperature dropped suddenly around midnight. His breath started misting. Frost began forming on the metal parts of his rifle. Then came the smell. Wet dog mixed with something rotten. He saw it through the thermal scope first. But this time it wasn't hunting sheep. It was hunting him. The thermal image was massive. It moved with a disturbing combination of animal grace and human purpose. Every few steps it would pause and seem to test the air. The hunter could feel his heart hammering. The rifle felt slippery in his sweating hands. This wasn't like hunting foxes or deer. This was something that could think. And worst of all, it knew he was there. It moved cautiously, deliberately. A few steps, then stopped. Head tilted, listening. Then a few more steps, always keeping to cover. It was using the trees, the shadows. Moving like a soldier trained in woodland warfare. At one point, it dropped to all fours, and the hunter lost sight of it in the thermal scope. His heart nearly stopped. Had it circled around? He swept the scope frantically. Then he spotted it again. Closer now. Maybe 200 yards out. And it was looking directly at him. When it got to about 150 yards out, it did something that chilled him to the bone. It stood up fully erect and spread its arms wide. Like it was presenting itself as a target, like it was daring him to shoot. He obliged. The first silver bullet hit center mass. The impact was immediate and dramatic. There was a flash of what looked like blue sparks where the bullet struck. The creature let out a howl that was nothing like the howls he'd heard before. This wasn't a threat or a hunting call. This was pain, real pain. But it didn't go down. Instead, it charged. The hunter got off 2 more rounds before it reached the tree stand. Both hit. He saw the sparks, heard the howls. But it kept coming. The impact when it hit the stand was tremendous. The whole structure shifted. Metal brackets groaning, bolts shearing, wood splintering below. It was climbing, and it was climbing fast. The hunter leaned over the edge and fired straight down. The bullet caught it in the shoulder. This time the effect was immediate. The creature lost its grip and fell, hitting the ground hard. It lay there for a moment, stunned. Then it rolled over and looked up at him. In the moonlight, he could see its face clearly for the first time. It was wrong. Not quite wolf. Not quite human. But a horrible mix of both. The eyes, though. The eyes were entirely too human. Too intelligent. Too aware. It spoke. Not in words exactly, but in a growling, guttural approximation of speech. The hunter couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Pain. Rage. And underneath it all, something that sounded almost like fear. Then it ran. Even with 3 silver bullets in it, it ran. But it was different this time. Slower. More labored. The silver was working. The hunter climbed down and followed the blood trail. The silver must have prevented the rapid healing these creatures are known for, because the trail was heavy and consistent. Dark drops on leaves. Smears on tree trunks where it had steadied itself. It led deeper into the old-growth forest. He found it about a mile in, collapsed against an ancient oak tree. It was still breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths. As he approached, rifle raised, it looked at him with those too human eyes. The transformation had already begun. The fur was receding in patches. Muscles writhing beneath the skin as bones cracked and reformed. The muzzle was shortening, pulling back into a more human configuration. It was horrifying and pitiful at the same time. In its eyes, he saw something he didn't expect. Resignation. Maybe even relief. The creature that had terrorized the countryside looked almost grateful that it was ending. Its breathing was getting shallower. Blood pooled beneath it, dark in the moonlight. The silver bullets had done their work. The wounds weren't healing. It raised one hand, more human than claw now, toward him. Not in threat, but in supplication. Its lips moved. For a moment, the hunter thought it was trying to speak again. Then he realized it was mouthing a single word. Please. He understood. It wanted this to end. Maybe it had always wanted this to end. He put the final bullet through its heart. A clean kill shot. The creature shuddered once, then was still. As he watched, the transformation completed. Within minutes, he was looking at a man. Naked, middle-aged, with graying hair and old scars covering his body. He knew him. Ronald Ashford, a hermit who lived on the edges of the community. Someone people saw occasionally, but nobody really knew. He'd been there for as long as anyone could remember. Living rough, keeping to himself. Looking at him now, at the scars that looked decades old, at the weathered face that could have been 60 or 90, the hunter wondered how long he'd been this creature. Which war had he lived through? The Second World War? The First? How long had he been cursed? The hunter buried him there in the old forest. It seemed right somehow. He couldn't exactly drag a naked corpse out of the woods. And who would believe his story anyway? He dug deep using a folding shovel. The earth was soft from recent rain. He said a few words. He wasn't religious, but it felt appropriate. Then he covered him over. He marked the spot with a small cairn of stones. Nothing that would attract attention. Just something so he'd know where Ronald lay. A week later, he reported Ronald missing. Told the police he'd seen him in the village looking unwell. Said he was worried when he hadn't seen him for several days. They searched, of course. But finding nothing in those vast woods wasn't unusual. The case was closed as missing, presumed relocated. The trail camera images, he destroyed them all. Burned the memory cards. Wiped the backup drives. The livestock killings stopped after that night. The farmers noticed. The police noted the sudden end to the wild animal attacks. But nobody asked too many questions. Rural communities are good at accepting when a problem has been solved without needing to know the details. The hunter's son was born 2 months later. Healthy and perfect. Sometimes when he holds him, he thinks about that night in the forest. About the creature that was also a man. About the look in its eyes at the end. A mixture of gratitude and relief. His wife still doesn't know the full truth. She knows something happened. Knows he's solved the problem. But she doesn't press for details. Maybe that's for the best. Some truths are too heavy to share. Too strange to be believed. The hunter still goes out shooting. Foxes, rabbits, the usual prey. But he always carries silver bullets now. Not because he expects to encounter another creature like that. He hopes he never does. But because now he knows they're out there. Sometimes on full moon nights when the wind is just right, he swears he can still hear howling in the distance. Not from where Ronald died. That forest is quiet now. But from other directions, other woods. Not the howl of a wolf, not the scream of a human, but something in between. Something that reminds him that no matter how civilized we think we've become, no matter how much we've mapped and cataloged and understood our world, there are still mysteries, still monsters, still things that go bump in the night. And sometimes, just sometimes, those monsters are also men. Or perhaps those men are also monsters. Maybe there's less difference between the two than we'd like to believe. The hunter thought it was over. He genuinely believed that burying Ronald Ashford in those woods had put an end to the nightmare. But normal doesn't last when you've killed a werewolf. The problem started about a year after that night in the forest. It wasn't the creature this time. It was people. The local youth had gotten worse, breaking into sheds, vandalizing property, dealing drugs in the village center. His wife was nervous every time she took their son to the shops. Then he got a phone call. A friend worked security for a big private estate down in Cornwall. They were looking for a gamekeeper, someone who could handle all aspects of vermin and pest control. The pay was excellent. Came with a cottage on the estate grounds. And most importantly, it was 300 miles away from everything that had happened. His wife didn't need much convincing. She'd never known the full truth about what he'd done in those woods, but she knew something had changed in him. Knew he still woke up sometimes in a cold sweat. A fresh start sounded good to both of them. They moved in a late October. The estate was beautiful. Thousands of acres of woodland, pasture, and moorland. The cottage was perfect. Old stone with a slate roof, sitting at the edge of a small wood with the field stretching out behind it. Their son, just over a year old now, loved it immediately. There was a proper garden for him to play in. The hunters settled into the work quickly. Foxes, rabbits, the occasional deer. Standard gamekeeping work. He was good at it. The months passed. Life was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. Then came the full moon in March. He was out checking fence lines when he found the first carcass. A deer, torn apart in a way that made his blood run cold. This wasn't a fox kill. This wasn't anything natural. The damage was too extensive, too violent, too familiar. Over the next few weeks, more carcasses appeared. Sheep this time. Mutilated, partially eaten, but mostly just destroyed. The hunter tried to tell himself it was coincidence, that he'd moved 300 miles away, that there was no way, but deep down he knew. He started carrying silver bullets again, started sleeping lighter, started checking locks twice before bed. One night, his dog started barking. Not the usual warning bark. This was pure terror. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. At the edge of the tree line, he saw them. Eyes. Multiple sets. All standing at human height. His heart sank. This wasn't one creature. This was a pack. And he realized with cold certainty that they hadn't found him by accident. They'd been looking for him. Ronald Ashford had not been alone. He'd had family, a pack, and they'd come for revenge. The hunter knows now that this isn't over, that killing Ronald didn't end the story. It started a new chapter, a darker one. He's preparing, stockpiling silver, reinforcing the cottage, training his dogs. Because when the next full moon rises, he knows they'll come. And this time, he won't just be hunting. He'll be hunted. The British countryside is full of secrets. Old forests that remember when wolves still roamed. Ancient bloodlines that carry curses older than any written record. And men who, in trying to protect what they love, become part of the very darkness they sought to destroy. Somewhere in Cornwall, on a private estate with woods that stretch for miles, a man waits. He cleans his rifle, counts his silver bullets, kisses his son goodnight, and listens to the wind. Because on certain nights, when the moon is full and the air is still, he can hear them out there, circling, waiting, planning. And he knows that sooner or later, the hunt will begin again. Only this time, he's not sure who the prey is.